And good afternoon. How are you? Frank here again. I'll be with you till 3 o'clock. I missed you last week. I did whatever was going around. I happened to have caught it over the weekend, so I was a bit homebound. But hopefully, well, not hopefully, I'm better now, and I'm looking forward to spending the next 3 hours with you. At this time, I'd like to thank Eben for stepping in at the last minute and filling in for me. Thanks, Eben. I should say, great job. Okay, as always, we've got our special guest today. I will firstly introduce my co-host, Graeme. How are you?
Well, thanks. Very well, Frank.
Good. And would you like to introduce our very special guest?
Yes, a very special friend too, Nathan Brown, whom I've known for 20 years. How time flies. Because Nathan was the first CEO of Leading the Way with Dr. Michael Youssef and did a marvellous job. And then sadly we lost him. But since then he's been doing magnificent things. He's now the CEO of Christian Media and Arts Australia, which has a marvellous mission statement. Let me read it. Our mission is to advocate and empower the creativity and excellence and unity of members and Christians in media and the arts, so as to spark a movement that transforms lives. Now, Nathan, welcome to this afternoon.
Thank you, Graeme. Nice to be here. Nice to meet you, Frank.
And thank you for coming.
Nathan.
Our listener, Nathan, is going to love to know what makes you tick and how you got into a job like the CEO of Christian Media Arts Australia.
Well, we call it short CMAA. So Christian Media and Arts Australia is a little bit of a long mouthful to get to, but I've been in this gig for coming up to 5 years now. And what excites me every day is just what you've read there. And it's actually working with stations just like Rhema here on the Central Coast to see lives redeemed and transformed, to see a society and culture be brought back to Jesus. So that's what gets me out of bed every day, and that's what inspires me.
Fantastic. Well, what a way to get out of bed every morning. That's brilliant. So tell us how it actually works. What do you do to make that vision? And I know it's happening because you're going to tell us some very exciting things that happened just quite recently, but how does it work? How do you make it work? Well, along with God's help.
I ask myself that question every day, really. How do I make this work? Well, God has to make it work. But I'm a door pusher. That's how I view what I do every day. I push on doors and ask if I'm meant to walk through them, that God would open the door and allow us to walk through. But seriously, I look to organisations like this, that you're doing such an amazing job here on the coast. You are connecting people with Jesus every single day. And I pray that people will not only hear what God has to say through the broadcasts, but will then be able to act on it, to be a catalytic influence in society, in culture, to lead people and draw people towards Jesus. Now, I guess I even forgotten your question, but I've gone off on a tangent there.
But it just 2 questions. What makes you tick? I think you've started in on that very well, getting out of bed to do what you do so well for CMAA. And how does it work? How do you make it? How do you facilitate the vision of CMAA?
Yeah. Well, we're a one-to-many organisation, so we don't exist outside of members like this Christian radio station here, which, by the way, is one of 36 licensed Christian community broadcasters in Australia. And then there is the Vision Radio Network, which has over 700 small little outlets. If you've ever driven into a country town, you will have tune into 88.8, tourist radio. A lot of that network went bankrupt back in the 90s, early 2000s, and so this particular network, in fact, a gentleman called Ian Warby had a vision of seeing Christian radio for every Australian, and so it's quite a phenomenal story of God's favour and just growth, so that today we see that this station here is broadcasting and reaching over 5 million Australians every month, and that's a phenomenal number. Part of our membership is also the Australian Christian Channel, which you can get on an app or on Foxtel or a number of platforms. But we're a very unified, God's actually allowed us to be a very unified sector, and really that's what makes me really excited about the future, about what God is doing. And I'll give some examples of things that He's up to in and through you guys and you as listeners every single day within our society and within our culture.
That's exciting. That's very exciting, because in that unity is where God commands the blessing.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And it's a passion of mine to see more unity. Well done. But
you asked what makes me tick, and I think, like everybody, I think immediately of family. I'm the eldest of 3 kids. Family tradition is certainly. I was brought up in a Christian family from very early on, and I share this because it actually frames who I am today and what I do. But our past always forms how we think about the future and what we actually do. Yeah. But I was the eldest I am the eldest of 3. They're still all alive, my siblings, and I've got 3 kids myself, my wife Jenny, and all our kids have an understanding of the Lord and following the Lord, which is wonderful. But that's really what drives and makes me tick on a daily basis, and gives me then, I guess, the passion to see, well, how do I be this influence in the same way that I was to my kids and my father was to me, in terms of our members and leaders within our sector, so that they can reach many for the gospel.
Fantastic. And I should mention Lee Brown, your father, of course, was in ministry for many years too, wasn't he? With Turning Point, was it?
He loves Turning Point.
Oh, okay.
You're talking about David Jeremiah. You're speaking to him recently, right? Because he carries on about David Jeremiah every time I see him. Loves him.
But it was Charles Stanley.
He was part of bringing Charles Stanley to Australia, and then ran Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, the Samaritan's Purse, for many years. But very influential.
Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting, especially Turning Point. David Jeremiah is pretty good, actually. One of my favourites. Okay, we'll take an into studio with me. I've got my co-host Graeme and our special guest Nathan Brown. Once again, welcome, Nathan.
Thank you.
And Nathan, you work as a CEO with CMAA, a peak body looking after Christian media and arts in Australia. Mm-hmm. Just what does CMAA do to fulfil that role? Yeah,
well, like most peak body organisations, which is what we are, we exist for our members. And I guess a couple of frameworks that I like to think of in terms of what we do is that we help our members think well, create well, and speak well into life, society, and culture. And our why we exist is to see the redemption and transformation of life, society, and culture. But we can't do that by ourselves. We have to do that through members, through Christians in media and in the arts. But I work in, I guess, category-wise, we work in advocacy, so keeping the public square open for freedom of speech is a real key thing that we do, and advocating for that, and in the society, and with topics that are going down at present, and the Falau incident. It just shows that we need that to advocate for that more and more. And I'm not talking about an aggressive tone in that space, but I'm talking about the freedom to be able to talk about things, about our faith, and have opinion of things, and keeping that space open in our public square, which is really important. So advocacy is one thing. We then develop a whole lot of networks and events that so I'm off to, and we do this both nationally and internationally, so I'm off to present with a couple of people within our media sector at the Christian Media Conference in Florida in a couple of weeks. So there's about 2,500 people. So there's music artists like you'll hear here every day. Danny Goki's a friend of mine. The guy from We Are Messengers, Darren. They're great people that are all trying to influence lifestyle and culture like we are, and so we've got a voice into that space as well, which is actually quite a great privilege. So networks and events, we create various tools for our members because I'm a firm believer in that not doing things and reinventing the wheel, and there is great power in unity and doing things together.
Correct.
And various product services and a lot of awards and some scholarships. So there's a couple, like Hillsong's Let Hope Rise movie came out of a scholarship that we did. Again, we didn't do it, but we're a catalyst for one of the guys, Ben, from Hillsong, to go over and spend a week being immersed with Christians in Hollywood a couple of, actually about 6 years ago now. And out of that came Connections, of which the movie came about. But you know, to earlier, I push on these doors. We push on these doors as a board, as an organisation that's committed to seeing lives transformed and redeemed. And you never know what God's going to do as a result.
No,
the green shoots of growth that happen are around us all the time, which is phenomenal. So, yeah.
You're making us envious. Such an exciting life.
Actually, you don't want to look at my Facebook page because people go, "Do you ever work?" I do have fun. I think it's really important to have fun in what you do, right? Because if you're not having fun, I just think that perhaps you need to have a look whether your gifts are actually aligned. Because I think that Jesus actually gives us passions.
Yes.
That you should be making sure that you have alignment of your passions with what you do.
That's good advice, yeah, especially for young people wondering what they're going to do with their lives. Excellent. And you're obviously passionate about it. And what a great opportunity to network over there in Florida, and you're heading up to Newcastle. And tell us a bit about the Gold Coast every year.
Oh yeah, well I do get around, but you know what excites me is, and I'm a catalyst. Okay, you know what a catalyst is. You put a catalyst into a space or into a beaker or whatever it is. Catalyst can be in various forms, but at the end of the day, the catalyst quite often disappears or isn't there afterwards, and what happens, the reaction that happens then is actually transformative and is something that then leads to something else. And so that's why what I view about what I do, it's actually done quietly, gregariously sometimes, but it's just my character.
Yep.
But I just love the fact that I get to connect the dots and help. You know, my whole thing is like, how can I help this organisation achieve, and this organisation may perhaps achieve things, and the tide rise for everybody in the process.
Brilliant. And I've been to one or two of the CMAA conferences on the Gold Coast.
Our Connect Media Conference,
Connect conferences. And you get some great speakers and some really talented people, and some wonderful inspiration comes out of that.
Oh yeah, I mean this year was that happens in May every year, and really it's a rallying point for Christians in media and our members, all the radio stations around the country who are reaching, and the TV stations. Now it's phenomenal how many people we are reaching, over 5 million. So our surveyed numbers have just come out of community broadcasters, of which Rhema is a community broadcasting station. We have 36 members. So on a weekly basis, 1.663 million people are listening to Christian community radio in Australia. And that is phenomenal. Last month, 900,000 people during the month watched a program on the Australian Christian Channel app, not the free-to-air broadcast, the app.
Wow.
So God is doing something amazing within our country through Christian media, through Christian radio stations. And in a moment after the next break, let's have a chat about some of those things, because one of them happened last week, which was just phenomenal. And I just think it's worthwhile understanding for you, who, you know, if you're listening right now, what you have been part of. You're not sitting here on the Central Coast, part of just a vacuum. You're part of what God is doing across this nation, and it's really, really exciting.
It is. It really is.
Very exciting. Okay, thank you. We'll just take a break now, and with me I've got my co-host Graeme and the CEO of CMAA, Nathan Brown. G'day again, Nathan.
G'day, how are you doing?
Nathan, you mentioned a remarkable number of more than 5 million listeners connecting with CMAA members.
It's hard to say, isn't it?
CMAA members per month. Tell us more about that.
So I mentioned just before the break that our community broadcast stations, radio stations, just like Rhema here, are surveyed as part of there are 444 community radio stations in Australia, of which our sector makes up 36 of them. And they have a weekly audience, just in this last survey from McNair Yellow Squares, of 1.663 million per week. But listening habits, aren't just weekly listeners; they also measure monthly, and the number from just the community broadcasters survey is 4.663 million per month. But then you take into consideration Australian Christian Channel, which are our members, which last month had over 900,000 viewers on their app, and the Vision Radio Network, which isn't surveyed but would at least have another 500,000 per month, and you're looking north of 5 million Australians engaging over the age of 15 per month with some form of Christian media broadcasting in Australia, which is phenomenal because it's more than 25% of the Australian population. And it's just grown amazingly over the last number of years. And quite often people ask, well, why is this the case? Why is it growing? Well, obviously, there's the God factor in it. Yep. But I think that people more and more are wanting, in our culture, are wanting connection with others, with community. They're also desiring the values that we would espouse to as people of Christian faith. And, but when we look at a profile of the people that are listening, we do a research project with McCrindle Research. Mark has been involved we've been doing this for 6 years now, and it becomes a benchmarking study. But the number of people that are actually attending religious services, and it's quite a decent survey. It's nearly 5,000 people researched, and between 40 and 60% are not regular church attenders. Attend church once or less per month. Wow. So it actually has it's very attractional. It's very attractional because people are searching and looking for something.
Yeah, wow. So it's really a very real outreach into community through community stations.
Yeah, and I think it does two things. It's a voice of hope where there is. You look at some of the issues that we're dealing with as a culture at this point in time. This week, the whole situation in New South Wales with the abortion legislation. Yeah. That is, freedom of speech conversation. Euthanasia is going to come back. There's a whole range of really delicate, hard issues that we're dealing with as a society and culture. And I think that during these times, people look to where are the values that I'm going to relate to. This is the space in which Christian media operates and has it, and the church operates. We were just talking in the break that there are more people listening to Christian media in Australia and digesting the content that attend churches on Sundays. And so, with that comes great responsibility, obviously. But it's exciting. It's exciting times. And, but people actually get to be practical about their faith and about living it out. And, Miracles Day last week, and congratulations. Let me just say congratulations to the people of, to you listeners of the Central Coast here, because as of this morning, you've given 246 cataract operations. Now, that is phenomenal, because every single one of those cataract operations means that for the first time in a long time, someone will be able to see their daughter or their son. They'll be able to actually go and participate in earning a living for their family. I mean, that is phenomenal what you've done. And Frank, you were just telling me you've got to get a cataract operation.
Yes, unfortunately, soon. I'm due for one in a couple of weeks.
But I bet it doesn't cost $33, my friend.
A lot more than $33.
Unless you go to Nepal, right?
Sorry?
Unless you go over to Nepal and get it done. But I believe the wait's pretty long, that line over there.
But, actually, I got... I haven't opened it yet. This morning, in the mail, I got the paperwork from a specialist, which will include the cost. So I haven't opened it yet, but it's going to be a lot more than $33. I know that much.
But the difference it'll make in your life, and obviously in the lives of those people and the 246 people that your listeners have made possible this last week is just phenomenal. But what I love about something like Miracles Day, and this gives you a glimpse into how big the sector is and how many people are listening is that just last week, and this is as of right now, over 42,128. It just changed. Cataract operations were given. That's just last week. In fact, that's last Thursday. But every one of those is precious. And so if you gave a cataract operation this last week to somebody, then thank you on behalf of CBM and the partnership that we have with the sector. Yeah. And it's not too late. You can actually jump online, or I think the number's 131226. Is that right, Frank?
Yes, you can still donate.
226. Yep. You can still be part of that and helping take the tally up right here on the Central Coast.
And I think the national goal was 40,000, wasn't it?
That's correct. Yeah. And so it's blown past that.
That's great.
And, so $1.39 million was given last Thursday.
That's
and it's trailing on, but which is phenomenal. And that is you, a listener to this radio station, making a difference beyond yourself. And that's what I love about what happens as a result of Christian broadcasting in Australia is we get actually to, because where our money is, our treasure is, and so you're actually part of sharing God's love with somebody in need who will receive that miracle as a result of it's a simple gift of $33. But it's those sorts of things, and so that I'm involved on in part of actually bringing the sector together in unity around causes that are close to God's heart, and it's a great privilege.
Absolutely. In fact, I know you won't say so yourself, but I know that you were the one that you were the architect, right?
Part of putting that together, and it's a big. The great thing about and I go to whether you're a listener, so whether you consume media, you engage with it, whether there are people who are in management or behind the mic like you, Frank, we're all part of what God is. We're part of a bigger picture of what God's doing, and that is so exciting to see. So, whether it's an Operation Christmas Child we've got coming up, there are these activities that are happening nationally that we all get to be part of, that are actually connecting people, whether they know it or not, whether those 40 to 60% of people who don't attend church know it or not, that we're actually connecting them to something that God really cares about, and they're actually on that journey towards a relationship with Jesus, which is really exciting.
Absolutely, and unless someone tells them, how will they know?
That's right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Wonderful. That's really exciting, and I was so impressed with Thursday's increasing tally.
Yeah, because there was 92 last year, I believe, and so again, thank you for the part that you played. Obviously, I don't work for CBM, but I passionately believe in what they do, and they understand and have a great partnership with the sector in seeing people's lives changed, and so it's a privilege to be part of that.
The Christian Blind Mission, which countries do they mainly operate in?
So they operate globally, and you're going to ask me a question that I probably can't answer, Graeme, because...
I'm sorry, I should have...
But I know they work in Nepal because they were there last week. They also work in Indonesia. But each country gets given their own allocation of work. And blindness is one thing that they deal with, and the primary things, but they deal with all sorts of other issues like fistula, so women's issues, but all sorts of community development work as well, and they do a phenomenal job.
Yeah, because they mainly focus in developing countries, don't they? You wouldn't...
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So, and something like cataracts, I mean, quite simple operation that can cure blindness, can't it? What's it take, 20 minutes to do?
Well, you'll find out, I guess, soon,
I'm going
Frank.
to find out.
But...
I heard it doesn't take that long, maybe half an hour. No, I don't know. But I'll find out, all right.
Only a day surgery.
Graeme and our special guest, Nathan Brown. Once again, welcome, Graeme. Welcome, Nathan.
Nathan's our guest. And Nathan, thank you so much for being here today.
Pleasure.
Now, I've known you long enough to know that it wasn't always a bed of roses, and you've been pushing on those doors, and God's opened some really miraculous ones. But I know that over the last 2 decades that I've known you, there's been some overcoming you've had to do of your own.
Yeah, interestingly, hearing in that last break the overcome and overcoming, and I know it's about overcoming things to do with sport, I believe. But, I think that I was reflecting just this week about the things that we're studying Job at our church. And, you look at the life of Job and the things that he went through and had to overcome, of course, wasn't of his doing. But I look at just my own life and own journey, and I think it's probably everybody goes through this. And it's all, on the surface you go, well, of course I know. If you're a person of faith, a believer, you'll know that, well, God works through everything for the good of those that he's called according to his purposes and according to his name. So, I look at these things, but it still doesn't take away from how hard those and painful those things are, even though I'm strangely grateful for them now. And I just think that, there was a period there between 2010 and 2012. We had three things that really could have shaken my faith. And I think that if you haven't been through something that actually shakes you to your core, at some stage it's probably coming. Unfortunately, but fortunately too, right? But I think for me, the time, there was three things that happened. I remember it was the 10th of March 2010 when my son was badly burned in a fire at school in a science experiment accident. It was one of those old ones where you take chlorophyll out of leaves, and so it has to do with Bunsen burners and methylated spirits, and he ended up with it all over him. And I turned up to the hospital with half of all his skin hanging off his arm, and he was blowing on it, loving those green whistles. I'm not sure if you've ever had one, but apparently they're awesome. But I mean, just seeing that as a parent, that was just tragic to me. And then he was getting better, and then in May of that year, my wife, who was a competitive cyclist, she was doing the Tour of Canberra and came down in a race and broke her neck. And then a year, so they started to get better, and my son ended up with a staph infection as well. So I was running this organisation at the time, high pressure job. And so during that time I was like, God, where are you in all of this? And how am I going to get through all of this? And that's where I'm just so thankful. It's about the people, God's people that were around us, our church. I'm so thankful for that. And so, I'm so thankful that God works through people and brings people into our lives. But I think that the hardest time was a year after that. It was actually on the 11th of March the following year, 2011, where we received an extortion letter through the mail. And that mail had in it a letter that was about 4 pages long, demanding, threatening that they would, whoever wrote this letter, they were demanding $60,000, or they would do things to our children, and they named all their activities and where they were on Friday nights and at the bus stop and all these sorts of things. And that was perhaps the worst time that I can remember. But all that to say that God was with us through all of that time. And it taught me during that time that, when you're stripped down to nothing, because that's effectively what it did, and that last incident certainly stripped us down to nothing, that all I had was faith. I couldn't even see who the enemy was. And isn't that like what life is about?
Yeah.
He's an unseen enemy, but when you can't see the enemy, but it gave me insight into the fact that God is in control, but also we're part of a spiritual battle that's going on. And so, during those times, and I was just encouraged, to constantly look to Jesus as the author and perfecter of faith, but also just how do I rest in him? How do I lean into him? And so that really taught me during that time how to go about that. And as a result, what I'm doing now, I'm hoping you're hearing a bit of joy in my voice, but it's all been part of it. So it's all been part of it.
Okay, that's interesting. Thanks, Nathan. Thanks for your sharing for the past hour. Unfortunately, the news is coming up, and as they say, the news stops from no one. They even cut off the Prime Minister when the news is on, don't they? Have you noticed that? But I'm sure... I'm sure you're more important than the Prime Minister.
No. In the scheme of things, we're all very important in God's sight, right?
That's right. And Scott is a faithful Christian, so we shouldn't criticise him too much, should we? Once again, thanks for your company, Nathan,
Pleasure.
and thank you for sharing with us for the past hour. Graeme, thank you, and you'll be back next week with another guest.
Yes, indeed. Yep.
Okay, we've got the news coming up, and I'll see you on the other side of the news in about 10 or so minutes' time. Have a good lunch.